How did you come about A Tender Thing, and why did you select it for this season?
Well, for 15 years I worked at the Shakespeare Theater in Washington, D.C. And so the mandate at the company was everything had to come from Shakespeare or be inspired by Shakespeare or something of that realm, which meant we could do everything from Greek drama to... At the end of my time there, they did a Britney Spears musical that went to Broadway that they claimed was a classic because it was based on Grimm's fairy tales, and Grimm must have been inspired by Shakespeare. And I wanted them just to say, we did it to make money. That would have been a better answer. And they made a lot of money. But when we were in the pandemic, I mean, the theater was shut down for a year, and then we were looking for stuff to reopen the theater with. And this came across my desk because the artistic director, Simon Godwin, was a member, part of the Royal Shakespeare Company, and he knew about the piece, and he was friends with Ben Power, who put it together. And we ended up not doing it because I felt it was too intimate for our smaller theater, which was 450 seats. And I kind of tucked it away. And then we were looking for a small play this year where we have a lot of big stuff. We have La Cage that just finished. We've got bigger cast shows. And I thought, well, what is something unusual that I could do? Because Waiting for Godot had been a success when I got here. Faith Healer had been a big success, and as well done as it was, I thought, what people want to see tragedy in the summer? You know? And then I thought, well, let's give them that crowd pleaser, Tender Thing. No, but I just thought this play is unusual. It's, whether you love it or like it or don't like it at all, you'll never see a play quite like it. I've never done a play like it. I probably will never do a play quite like it again. And I was interested, so.
So James, you just saw it recently. How was and you read it before you saw it, correct? What's kind of your initial reaction from reading it to then seeing it? That's two very different animals there.
Yes. I should say first how much I enjoyed the production. Something very fundamental about this as a play, two people in a room. And that's a sort of primal challenge for any director, I think, as is possible. How we're going to fill the space, the movement, what we do visually. And this play has that great advantage of the backstory that everybody on some level knows. There is always necessarily that creative tension as the play of the original script. But to get to your question, reading any script, I think, is difficult in a sense. It's only realized in production. And I found that the script, I have to admit, slightly alarming to begin with. It takes great courage to take on Shakespeare, or lunacy to take on Shakespeare. You think of how many dramatists tried to play off a Shakespeare play or writing Shakespeare's style and come to terrible grief. Very few unequivocal successes. I don't know, Tom Stoppard's perhaps would be an obvious one. Somebody who's intellectually and creatively up to the task. And I suppose with all Shakespeare there is this challenge of whether you want complete fidelity to Shakespeare's words, fidelity to Shakespeare's time. You go to production, you see something where everything is in period costume, and there's that reverence which can sterilize the text in a way, versus the other end, where it's free open range, we do what we like, and that can lead to trouble too. So I was anxious as I read, and some of the shifts that take place in this play, Juliet speaks words that are from the speech of Mercutio. We get a backstory through the words of the nurse. And my alarm became more interested the further I went. So I'll start with that first response.
I'll say that the script has 0 stage directions in it. Like it says they dance, or the sea crashes, and then they have like these long speeches. And for me, that's great fun because it means you know, an active imagination to try and understand what the hell is happening. You know, because in Shakespeare, bad Shakespeare, they could speak it well, and nothing's happening. But in a play, there's action, there's attention, there's activity, and you have to begin to figure out what fundamentally is the beginning, middle, and end of each scene. What is the beginning, middle, and end of the play? What do they go through? And you have to accomplish that not between the lines, but on the lines. So you and you have to obey the meter of Shakespeare. If you start putting pauses in the middle of an iambic line, then it doesn't make any sense. And if you take these big speeches and break them apart too much, you lose the thread of what they're saying. So I love the challenge of that. And in Washington, I have done so many Shakespeare plays, and when you do that, you take nothing for granted about the play, because if you do the original Romeo and Juliet, as I've done twice, I mean, what does it mean to be in Verona? I mean, what time of year is it? Well, we know it's summer. What is the period? Does it have a period? Does it have no period at all? What do they wear? You know, comedy, I mean, all these plays, as a director, you imagine the whole thing. And so that was the attraction of this to me. And I guess I didn't realize how ambitious it was till we started rehearsal. Or till we started the design process, and I realized this weird play that I had in my head was not what everyone else had in their head. It's like, why don't you see what I see? What is going on here? And so that was the fun of it, and honestly, it was an enormous challenge to do it. So.
Yeah, we realized when we read it on the artistic team how beautiful it was, and we started talking about it, it started being like, there's something about a child? Is she sick? It's something, like, I think they talk about a child briefly, and then to see what Alan and those two actors did is kind of amazing, because you really had to figure out what the show was beyond beautiful Shakespearean language rearranged, because there's just little bits and pieces of things happening. And seeing them pulled together was just wonderful to watch. So talk about Shakespeare adaptation. This is a rare breed. I don't think I've ever seen anything where someone is literally really just feel like a lot of cut and pasting from the folio to a new play. What do you think lends Shakespeare so handsomely towards adaptations? You know, we have the West Side Stories, we have the Kiss Me Kates. Like, what do you think what about Shakespeare makes it so translatable?
Well, if you think of the plays that Shakespeare plays that have, as it were, entered popular culture, whether you've read them or not, Romeo and Juliet has to be, if not top. It's there, it's Hamlet. Those are the two plays, right? And Romeo and Juliet, why is that so enduring for people? Young lovers operating against a series of social, political prescriptions at a particular moment in time, right? And that play opens up just so fundamentally these questions. Well, should parents have control of children? To what extent? To what extent should culture regulate sexuality and all these other things? And here, these two young people feeling this desire. And it's explosive, isn't it? And you will opens up. And then the play asks these progressively more awkward questions. Is this not something we should admire? Or are they being foolish? And for those of you who've seen, I don't know, Baz Luhrmann, maybe being the most recent, it really shows what is there in Shakespeare's text, that Romeo is actually kind of self-dramatizing, a bit egotistical, certainly not as emotionally smart as Juliet, right? In the movie, she's actually waking up from being drugged, and he's into his monologue, thinking about himself, doesn't see him, takes his own life. So all that is ripe always for revisiting, as it is in so many different genres. This play, I think, does something extraordinary. What happens next? If we think of, I don't know, any romantic novel you care to, Jane Austen, right? It's all about the experience of how people are discovering each other, how they're thinking about their desire and their love for each other, and how this fits into a larger social structure. And here, aging. In one sense, this imagines an entirely different world, doesn't it? A lot of things have to be jettisoned but it gives this incredible opportunity, doesn't it, for thinking about later love. Shakespeare doesn't write much about love, does he? Antony and Cleopatra, perhaps, could be one. They're not old, they're aging. They've been around the track. That play is so much about persuading yourself that you're in love. Slightly cynical people, right, who they realize it's not the experience, that explosive experience of being 13 or 15 or whatever it is. So an immense opportunity there. And I think the real question for this play and for directing this play is how you can recruit that language, which is quite specific to young lovers, and remake it, reanimate it.
Well, what's funny, well, I'm just thinking of Cleopatra, which is my salad days when I was green in judgment. And then the extraordinary speech when he dies, that she's, I don't, I'm not going to quote it, but, because I'm going to misquote it, but, his delights were dolphin. But this, you have a line that Juliet says in the balcony scene. My bounty is as boundless as the sea, my love is deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have, for both are infinite. I mean, a 70-year-old person knows more what that means than a 13-year-old person. So in a way, it's just an interesting thing to hear some of that language. I just remember doing this play so many times, the original, and you get these Juilliard graduates and they're declaiming their love and they're demonstrating with great passion what they feel, and in this play they just say it so simply, because after a long time you don't have to declaim it, you can just say it and mean it. And I think the fun for me is that over time with this language and with good actors, they go from histrionic to having an economy. They can be economical about the way they do it, and so there's a simplicity that these two actors can bring to this because they have such a mastery of the language. And that was the one thing we really, we both spent a lot of time on the language and not at all. I had brought in a voice and text coach from my old theater, and they did like one session with her, and they're like, they don't need her. But we yelled a lot in rehearsal about things you don't talk about in a normal play, like antithesis and parentheticals, because often a line begins and there's a parenthetical statement that runs 4 lines and then they pick up a thought, or Romeo has a word in his speech and he has to say it in a way so that on the next page she can pick up on that idea. So there's a lot of stuff that we talk about in the rhetoric of the language, which was really fun to do after doing only musicals for a few years. And I think the play, just the interesting thing about the language, which is sometimes as sweet as that and sometimes jarring, like when the Queen Mab speech comes into the play, I feel it's such a weird moment. And I was really self-conscious about it and shy about it, until I thought, you know what? This guy put the Queen Mab speech in there. Everybody knows the speech. She says, and then I see Queen Mab had been with you. And I thought, Alan, you just have to go for it. You have to go for it. There are pieces of this play that are dissonant. Don't apologize for it.
I thought that was one of the great moments.
Really?
The Queen Mab speech, Mercutio, is pretty misogynistic. Right? There's incredible passion there, and it's coming out of Juliet, right? What was motivating that? And the backstory, which is suggested throughout the play here, they've lost a child, right? It's hinted. It could be she's regretting her own youth in some way, but the loss of a child is much more plungent. And there's an anger in her and a loss, and this couple can't actually speak openly about this. And that becomes the drama of aging, doesn't it?
Yeah, because she's got the nurse speech, and then he doesn't want to deal with it, and he storms out, and then you see her totally unhinged, having a meltdown, doing the same speech later on in the play. And I just bless these two actors, because it takes a lot of courage to just like go for it. It's not easy. I think I've done a lot of opera in my time, and Candy, who plays Juliet, I think is like an opera singer. And what I mean by that is usually with an actor, you have to push them slowly off the ledge for them to do something big on stage, you know. And then you have an opposite experience with an opera singer where you have the first rehearsal, they have their death scene, and they just fall to the floor and scream and yell and writhe and die. And there's no effort to get them to do that, you know. And so the day we got the wheelchair and we're doing this sort of, you know, it's a mad scene in a way because she's driven herself crazy. She just like was unhinged and rolling around the room and screaming and crying. And then she finished and she was totally clear. I said, you know, what's for lunch? And I like you. You're my kind of actor. So, and that's been the fun. Candy and Derek. This is their 6th show together. They made their Broadway debut in Ring Around the Moon, playing opposite each other. They were part of Robert Brewstein's company at ART for many years. Derek was a company member of the Shakespeare Theater in Washington. He was a deranged Captain Hook. I did a world premiere of a new version of Peter Pan and Wendy by the playwright Lauren Gunderson. He was like jumping off a boat into the mouth of a 40-foot crocodile. I mean, he's insane. And the fact that they both were insane enough to want to do this just makes me like them even more.
The chemistry was fantastic. The scene you evoked, for those of you who saw the show, as bounteous as the ocean, that follows a sequence in which he's overheard her professing her love and expects they're going to go to bed.
Yeah.
She's, what is it, playing hard to get, or whatever. But that moment you had when she's leaving the stage, he's holding the champagne bottle, he's kind of shocked, and he just does this thing with her shoulders.
Yeah.
Come on, we both know better than this. Then they go to bed together. And it allows the unleashing of this emotion, which might be sort of ridiculous in one way, but it's also a pleasure from them, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. It's the only moment of pleasure in the show. So he says, can you stay in that a little longer? Don't rush it. We need it.
Till the end.
Till the end.
I'll say the great thing about, I think there's so much of Romeo and Juliet, the original, is there is so much debate about, are they being foolish? Are they just young idiots? They met each other, they fall in love in the course of our days. Taking those words that would be debated in the mouths of 2 older, experienced actors, you believe all of it. All these foolish things they say to each other, original Romeo and Juliet, now feels like such sentiments between the 2 of them.
But very difficult, like when she says gallop apace, you fiery-footed steeds. I mean, for her to be her age and impatient for him to come into the room, and she doesn't know he's there, it's a fine line because the speech is written for a child to be childish and impatient. How you navigate the language with that. We tried a lot of different things, and then the play was so heavy that we often got goofy. I haven't seen, they haven't shown it to me, but they have a Southern Gothic version of it. You know, and I don't want to spoil it for, you know, because I don't want to take you out of it when you come in if you haven't seen it. But, well, no. I'm going to tell you. His first line in the play, he comes in the room and she's in her sick bed, and he says, "Thou detestable maw, thou womb of death." And so he calls her detestable maw. Like they're hillbillies. And they start doing it, and they start laughing, and I have no idea how they do the play for real after they have their version of it, but that I'm not going to go further into that.
But to follow up on that, in essence, Juliet is, on the one hand, impatient, isn't she, in the original play of young, but also incredibly knowing. That sequence, the double sonnet, Holy Palms,
Oh, yeah.
hands, you swear by the book, right? What's the book? No, that's right.
You kiss
by the book, right? You're following an accepted form. Is what you're doing here, you know, you're just trying it on with me, or is it authentic? That dynamic is always there. And I thought this play actually brought out some of them, maybe not enough. Old lovers who know each other so well, there isn't any room for freshness. this, right?
Yeah.
That's the challenge. I was thinking as I watched the play again and again, sonnet 138. When my love swears that she is made of truth, I do believe her, though I know she lies.
He should have put that in the play.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's perfect. Yeah, thinking that she may think me some untutored youth, unlearned in the world's small subtleties. So the sonnet sets up, right? I'm lying to her, she's lying to me. We both get some benefit out of this, right? I can imagine foolishly that I'm younger than I am, not balding and all the rest of it, right? And she can think that she's fresh, inexperienced, all the rest of that. And the poem, at the end of the poem, love's best habit is sealing truth. Love in age, love's not age to be told, right? Which is sort of a version of, does this dress make me look fat, right? On some level, it's important in a relationship to recognize that you have to kind of shape the truth, right? Nothing wrong with that, it's necessary. And the poem ends with, now, the final portion of poems, of course, suddenly disappeared. The final couplet is, so I lie with her, double lie, she lies with me. We've already, the double meaning is we're together in bed, and in our thoughts my lies are frightened. It's a good thing to actually, on some level, remove it. And I think the more the play brought that out, the stronger it was.
We should add that in.
Oh yeah, it's, I think the best aging.
But we sat in rehearsal and we got bored and we got, what if we put in this line from this sonnet and Ben's not coming over. He's not, he's done with the play. He's, and then we play games like that and try and figure out why he reconstructed certain lines and, but that, I think that sonnet is just an example of why we keep coming back to this material, because it's not that the sentiment in that is something we don't know, but he writes it in a way that articulates it in a different way and that's so much of these great lines. No one has said it that way or as well before or since. Capture the specificity of that meaning. So I think that's why there's a whole theater is devoted to this material that's still trying.
Now, you went through your script, you figure out where everything came from, correct?
Yes,
Almost everything.
yes, and so did Maura Sullivan, our literary and artistic associate coordinator. But ultimately, it didn't matter. I mean, I knew most of it because I had done it. The sonnets are what I didn't know, and then he, of course, wrote lines, and I think his lines are not so great, the ones Ben wrote, because they're like very basic blank verse that the scansion is always perfect. They're not the way Shakespeare wrote, and if you've done enough Shakespeare over the years, it's like you can sense it out a little bit. Like what it's too clean.
Did you have the cast on it helpful to know where everything came from?
No.
Or was that more just kind of like?
No, because it doesn't matter if you're thinking of where it came from. You're not in the moment of the play. You're in the moment of the other play, and sometimes that's not helpful because your job is to. Well, that was the hardest thing about it, and sometimes it was difficult to work on the material because it would have been much more natural in its original context. Like the epilogue of the play is to young people or some version of that, meaning exactly what they say in the original play. So that was kind of easy. It's just that when you have to shoehorn it into a second context, you can make it work, but it takes a lot of muscling to make it feel easy. And that's the thing that on paper it's you don't even think about that, and then when you get into the playing of it, it's like Herculean, to try and do that. And we would, I was exhausted by the end of rehearsal every day, and I got a lot of stamina. I'm used to doing enormous musicals, and we could only get 4 or 5 hours a day in on this before I just went, oh my God. I have to go. I have to go home. So,
Let's open up to questions from the audience.
If you could speak up, everyone, that'd be great.
yeah.
Questions?
Yes.
Albert Williams, I teach a course on Shakespeare during what we call winter term. And I haven't seen your play yet. I plan to do this weekend when we come down to it. If you had not grounded in Romeo and Juliet, who after all are young teenagers, Juliet is only a year or two from touching the blanket. If you had grounded it in one or two of the other plays in which the leads die, Antony and Cleopatra, Macbeth, if he had survived the last battle.
I can't believe you just did that.
Could you, in fact, done this play without the Romeo and Juliet basis?
Meaning if it was a same concept based on another, I have no idea. But I'm just trying to think. I mean, I suppose you could, because this has nothing to do with the original in many ways, except that it's a man and a woman. I mean, Antony and Cleopatra. Well, it's so much of
If
that
they
is
had
about.
survived and they had married or whatever you would do back then,
Yeah.
it would be an interesting concept to how, as they age, how they would relate to each other, which
Oh,
is essentially what this play,
yeah.
I assume, is about.
I think that the art of adaptation is so interesting, and you can, if you're free enough to do anything. This has nothing to do with another Shakespeare play, but I was in London and I was thinking that I'd seen a one-man Uncle Vanya this year with Andrew Scott, and then it was an hour and 40. You saw it too.
I did.
Interesting, right?
It was interesting.
And you just accepted it on its own terms, and I think this play, it's interesting. I think that it's been more and more successful the more people know about it, because they come in with, when they know what they're seeing, they can accept it more than just like, I think the initial marketing we had for the play, which maybe made it seem like a comedy or something. But yeah, I'm eager to see more of that. That's a good question. I look forward to you seeing the play.
That's over here.
Thank you.
I was interested in the remark you made just before we get into questions. It doesn't matter where the text came from, because that's just distracting. Because as an audience member, I saw, I'll be seeing it again next week, and I was really interested in kind of this, but I couldn't help feeling that I needed to do some studying beforehand to recognize where this came from, because it would give extra meaning to it. But you're assuring me that that's not true.
Well, what did you think? Did you think you were helped by that?
I felt, one of the reasons I'm here today is I felt a little bit hampered by the fact that I hadn't done a little more preparation for it, and I thought I would have gotten more out of it if I had. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll see next week.
This is why I love the Berkshires. You got nervous about being prepared for the play. And you felt so unprepared, you came back again. It's my kind of audience. No, I mean, I think it's, the play's two things. I mean, I think it's an intellectual exercise on one thing. Oh my God, that's the Queen Mab speech, and why is it here? But and so you can enjoy it on that level, and maybe the second time you will. You don't have to. I think once you get used to the language, and it takes a few minutes to get used to the rhythm of it, you just sort of understand it. And I think that the beauty of Shakespeare is that you, unless you really know the plays, you never really understand the 100% full meaning of it, but you don't have to understand every single word to understand what is meant by it, or the overall feeling, because it is archaic sometimes.
So many things there. There's a lot from 12 Nights.
Well, only the songs.
No, there are a couple other things.
Which one?
I'd have to look at the script. There's 2 or 3. But it produces these creative disjunctions. The more you know, perhaps the more you can play with that disjunction. You don't need it. The tension is there all the way through the play. I compare it to, I don't know, reading T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, for example. For any of you who know the longest form of lines in history, it's like a laundry cycle of literary quotations and resonances. And undergraduates go to with some guy, got to know that Greek source and more about it throughout. In a sense, the more you know, it's useful.
See, I was hoping you would invoke T.S. Eliot's cats.
We could go there. I don't think you need a great deal of specific knowledge. I'd agree with you, but you can.
Whether you need it or not, the question is, does having more enrich it in some other way that I missed?
Report back next week.
I think so, but
I think it has to.
yeah.
I think it does in a way. We saw it last night. And there's a way in which Shakespeare's kind of a character in this play. And I'm not saying that I was aware of that constantly, but when suddenly the Queen Mab speech showed up, or the nurse's words showed up to reveal that other element of the plot that happens, you know, it's like, oh my God, Shakespeare, okay, this is what the nurse said, now I'm seeing it. And I didn't find it a bad distraction.
Yeah.
But in a way, it was like, yeah, this is larger than just what's happening with these two characters.
There's a challenge though, when the most challenging moment for me was the friar's speech.
Yeah.
And that was challenging for me every time I did the show, because why is he talking about these plants? And it's so rhetorical, and how do you make it not? You know, it's a heavy lift, some of that. But it's a heavy lift in the play. You know, in the play, you just get your pen out, cut this, cut that. You know.
I will say that you do not need to know Shakespeare at all to enjoy this show. I feel like that should be on the posters. We've had actually people show up to the show, and our house manager sends us reports and said, you know, people saying, "Oh, I didn't realize this was in Shakespeare." Like in Shakespeare. And I'll say, as a non-Shakespearean person, I just go along for the ride. I feel like if you're a deep Shakespeare person, which my husband is, it's like he talked about how it's like just a bunch of Easter eggs. You're like, oh, that's from there. And I was like, oh, I just go for the ride. Enjoy the language and beautiful acting. But you do not need like a decoder ring to be able to do the show. I saw a hand over here.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, Alan, you mentioned Ben, and I would just love for you to speak as a director about your relationship with the author, with the playwright, living or dead. Do you want to have a conversation, but you don't have a conversation? Do you not want to have a conversation?
Ben Power, who put this together, wrote he's the adapter of the Lehman trilogy. Has anyone seen the Lehman trilogy? Heard about it? I mean, it was an 8-hour play in Italian that he, you know, got down to 3.5 hours with 3 actors in English, and kind of an amazing feat of theater, not dissimilar to this. I wanted to have a relationship with Ben, but I think he's very busy right now. I think he's writing a TV show or something.
It's going to the National.
Oh,
He said he was a little busy with the world premiere play.
But he also felt that he was done with his play, that he wasn't going to change it. And so I felt I would just do it. And we did make a couple small changes. I didn't really obey some of the stage directions because I felt that what he wanted wasn't explicit in what was happening. I thought we would cut and change more of it, but every time we made a cut, it didn't work, oddly enough. So he really had put it together in a careful way.
In terms of dramaturgy, as a director, do you want that conversation? Is it frustrating if the person is deceased? Is it just part of the whole?
No, you always want the conversation, and this is a different answer, but I'll give it anyway. When I was doing Man of La Mancha, I did about 10 years ago in Washington, I couldn't figure out why certain pieces of the musical were put together the way they were. And I had remembered that someone in the auditions, an accompanist, had known the composer and had known the writers. And I called him in rehearsal and said, I'm just curious, why is this piece of the thing there? And I found out that certain things that I thought had great meaning were just practical. They needed some time for the star to do this.
Costume change.
Right, exactly. They were, these bits of music were here because Richard Kiley had wanted this. And the moment that you start to break apart the piece, it becomes less this mythic thing, and then it becomes, so the writers just, this was their idiosyncrasy. And I think that's true of all pieces, and especially the great pieces. You begin to kind of not take them for granted, or in that case, the arranger had understood how to use the music in a way that I was glossing over and rushing moments that had great meaning. There was a segment where at the end Quixote is dying and he dies, and there's all this dialogue, and then he's on the ground and the padre is singing a hymn, and underneath it the actor who's playing Quixote is getting rid of his makeup so that he can just reveal himself as the writer again. And I just would never have known that that's why it was there. So I think I get really annoyed and impatient with directors in musicals and in Shakespeare that can't see the meaning behind it. And,
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, hearing about the play, I thought I was going in for a sequel of Romeo and Juliet. But immediately I sat down and I saw the stage, and the staging and the sound and the lighting were really remarkable. I knew I was going to be on a very different journey. Do you want to talk about more about that? You said you didn't get many directions from the playwright about this. How did you conceive of this beautiful, and the lights coming down and the sound and the lights coming in from the side?
well, they just say, they don't tell you anything. They just say you hear the crash of the ocean. And then I thought of, did anyone see that Stephen Sondheim music, the unfinished musical that happened this fall in the Shed in New York? They're in this basically like a Boonwell drama where they're in a room and they can't escape the room. They can't leave, and I thought, okay, so we're in some weird room, and it's a real room, but it's also not a real room. And the ocean's behind them, and in the original, the bed leaves the stage, but I thought, what a nightmare to have a bed on the stage. If you have a bed, you need a stagehand. And then the lighting designer said, what if we put in these lights? And then I thought, oh, okay. I mean, there was no rhyme or reason to the whole thing.
It works really well.
But it does, thank you very much, but creating an atmosphere, and then, I strong-armed this major lighting designer named Robert Wurzel, who, has done many shows on Broadway and is a big designer in opera. And I said, do you have a couple days free in June? You want to come and do something you haven't done in a long time? And he's one of the resident lighting designers at Glimmerglass. He is the lighting designer that has done all of Bill T. Jones's dances since the late 80s. So he's comfortable in weird stuff. He doesn't need it to be linear. And that's true of the set designer, Marcia Ginsburg. Does some really abstract work, a lot of European work. So she's not uncomfortable saying she said, the less stuff you need, the better. I don't want to clutter this room. They don't have to move at all, Alan. So you have to get people around you that think that way. And I don't know. That's the fun of this.
It's all based on research. This didn't come up just in March. They did a bunch of research.
Yeah, we saw, if you go back to the New York Times design issue from sometime this year, there was a Japanese house that had beautiful concrete walls, a huge wall of windows, and then the sea and some modernist furniture. We basically copied it. Give credit where credit is due.
As a director, I wondered how you approached the pacing of this. In Shakespeare's play, the action is very condensed, and here, in some ways, it's just the opposite. It's cut very span of a lifetime. And although I think the scenes that frame this version, Juliet and Ben, kind of encapsulates the action, I wondered if, when you approached it, you thought that pacing would be an issue.
I am always worried about pace. I always think things are too slow. I like it when people talk fast. I think people in a play can often talk much faster than they do, and it's more exciting. And I become a crazy person on a musical comedy. There's pacing, and then there's musical comedy pacing. And then for this, I didn't worry about it at all. Because the only time I worried about it is if I felt that they were taking so long in the language that you got lost in what they were saying, because you can't sit too long in an idea. But it's funny, on Facebook, I don't know what my algorithm is, but I had this thing come up that said Judi Dench's advice on playing Shakespeare. Just yesterday. And I'm not like looking for like things, but she had very interesting, very practical things. Her advice was, okay, start scenes. And what she meant by that was when you get on stage and it's the beginning, you have to start it with energy. She said, pay attention to antithesis, drive through the speech, don't sit in it, get to the end of it. And then she said what I said earlier. She said simplicity and economy are key. And she said don't drop ends of lines. But she would be amazed with lesser actors. They drop the end of the line, and then you don't have the meaning of it. So it's practical. I love the technical part of it. It's so fun to deal with the technique of it. But I like it when things are fast, and I can think of a war I got into once. I'll just say for fun on a musical. I had these two older actors in Kiss Me Kate doing Brush Up Your Shakespeare, and they wanted to do it so slow. And I had seen the Broadway revival, and I couldn't convince them to go fast, and I had to finally appeal to their ego and say, those guys in the Broadway version, they did it at 120 clicks a minute. I really thought you both were capable of doing this. Are you telling me you're not as good as those guys? Because I think you're better. It's like, oh my God, what am I going to do to rev the engine up? And then you have a drink.
I did think that the intensity of this was much stronger than I would have thought, given that you don't have the compression of time.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Any final questions? Laura?
I'm just curious if there's any, if there was a line or a speech that you heard in a different way in this adaptation that will stick with you, or that made you, changed your whole perspective on what it could be.
Looking at me.
I'm looking at both of you.
That's tough to come up with a single line. I mean, that sense that we talked about a couple of times, the sort of creative disjunction. You're hearing a line that you knew really well from some context. It's emerged. It's kind of echoing within you. So my feeling is now, nearly a week after seeing the show, I'm still sort of digesting quite a lot of this, thinking that was a really smart move. I would have done something different with it. I'm still frustrated while at the same time I'm admiring what is unlocked. So I had that feeling about so many of the lines in the play. Recognizing the power, the opportunities that are unleashed, but also that sense of residual frustrations, strict Shakespeare textualism. What are you doing with that? I think that's a good place to be. That's creative energy being released.
I think for me, the addition of "O Mistress Mine" from Twelfth Night, because I've done the play twice. She's sick and they're having this big fight about what they're going to do, and then there's nothing to do but sit and sing about it. And we were very shy about doing that. The actors were reluctant to learn the song, and I was like, you just have to do it, and there's meaning in it. And they sing, "So come kiss me, sweet and 20." Well, what is love? It's not hereafter. Present mirth, present laughter. What's to come is still unsure. In delay there lies no plenty. So come kiss me, sweet and 20. Youth's stuff will not endure. But so they're going through this and they're saying, all we have is the moment, whether you like it or not. And it's an amazing moment of weird theatricality in the play, and very different than the context of when Feste sings it in Twelfth Night. But Shakespeare was a good lyricist, turns out.
I did think Feste's closing song, 12 Night, might be worth 10 minutes. whole arc of life.
Oh, yeah. Next time.
Yeah.
Well, with that, thank you so much,
Thank you.
everyone.